We'll take just a couple of minutes for you each to introduce yourselves and some planned questions that are predetermined by our grade Socials 11 students. And then we'll have open questions for the audience. And then a final word from each of the candidates to give you a final wrap-up of their thoughts. What I would like us to do to begin with is to, first of all, acknowledge that we are on the lands of the Tsleil-Waututh, the Squamish, and the Musqueam, thank you, peoples, the unceded territory of those peoples. So first of all, I guess I could go left to right initially for the opening statements, and then right to left for the closing statements. Is that?
Sure. Sounds fair.
Okay. Let's go with you then, Mr. Julian. A brief introduction. You got 2 minutes.
Okay. Do I get the mic? Or?
Yes. I kind of like the mic, but yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much. I too would like to acknowledge we're on the traditional territory of the Kakite First Nation and the Coast Salish peoples. And I'd like to say to Byrne Creek Bulldogs, you are amazing. The titles you've won, when we look at the sports, for example, rugby and volleyball and basketball and soccer and netball, you look at the academic achievement, Governor General's Award, NASA. When we look at what you do, the Byrne Creek Bulldogs really rock. And a special shout out to Ms. Falsetto, who this year was given the Goshira Cup as Citizen of the Year in Burnaby. What an amazing achievement. Shows the quality of the staff that you have there. Yeah, you can give her a round of applause. That's quite an achievement. So I'm just going to ask you a few things that I think are really important. I hope that you share that too. How many of you know a family or experience yourself or a relative or a neighbor that is having difficulty keeping a roof over their head in this housing crisis? How many of you? A number of you, yeah. How many of you know a relative or a family member or a friend or a neighbor that has succumbed to the opioid crisis that we're currently living through? A number of you, yeah. How many of you are upset by the gouging that takes place with your data plans and your cell phone, the cost that you have to pay that's much higher in Canada than anywhere else? A number of you. How many of you are concerned about post-secondary education, actually being able to pay for college and university? Wow. How many of you are concerned about the climate change crisis that is upon us and what kind of planet you're going to have when your children are starting to grow up? And how many of you reject Mr. Trudeau's pipeline, which is going to blow any possibility of dealing with the climate change right out of the water? How many of you oppose it? I think Byrne Creek is very indicative of what we're seeing right across New Westminster and Burnaby. People are speaking out. We need a change in Ottawa. And that's why so many people are getting involved on these issues. I hope to have you involved in our campaign. Our campaign office is up at Edmonds and Kingsway. And come on by, we have lots of young people involved. You can make a difference. On October 21st, I hope to have your support to continue as a member of Parliament and to fight for these issues and many others. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Naresh?
All right, well, thanks for having me. My name's Neeraj Morarka. You probably haven't seen me because I haven't won office yet. I'm a libertarian, not to be confused with the Liberals. A little bit of background about myself. I went to Caribou Hill Secondary School on the other side of Burnaby, and I finished my computer science degree at SFU, fantastic university. And today I'm here to talk about my party, but I also think this is a unique opportunity that I don't normally get to talk to the youth. I mean, a lot of you are going to be pretty soon going to be able to vote. And you know, this is a fantastic time for parties to reach out to you. And these are the formative years still. And you know, it's really important. Something I want to emphasize is critical thinking. This is a course, this is actually a form of thinking, a class, a discipline that we didn't cover when I was in school. I studied at the university, and this is something you pick up over time, but it's really important that you don't take whatever you hear, whether it's from your government or any sort of source of authority, you don't take it at face value. Please, you owe it to yourself and to your society, to your country, to think about the facts that you're hearing and evaluate them. Don't take them at face value. Myself, I'm a scientist, and I like to look at problems and then solutions. I don't like to just promise people that I'm going to give you free money and I'm going to promise you a job and all the prosperity in the world. That's not reality. People have to do hard work. You study hard, you go to school, you get good grades, and you succeed. You don't get it for free. That's reality. And I like to deal with problems and finding real solutions. So I want to make sure that when you're hearing everyone speak today, you're critical about what they're saying. If somebody says, I'm going to start building houses for everyone, or I'm going to start giving jobs to everyone, think about that. How is that going to happen? That money has to come from somewhere. That has to be done by someone. I want you to think that way, and whenever you hear anyone speak, or you're even in class and teachers are talking, it's your responsibility to ask questions and challenge anything that you don't necessarily understand. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Suzanne DeMontany, and I'm the Green Party candidate, so you can tell my little green button. I was a teacher for 20 years, so one thing I know is kids. And I'm also the author of 5 novels, and now I'm running for office because I have to, because nobody was doing anything about global warming, and I was really worried. Anyways, how many people here were at the climate strike last Friday? Yes, amazing. Now, isn't it amazing that that was started by a 15-year-old girl in Sweden? I just find that amazing, and I find you guys amazing because the world is starting to listen now because of you, because of youth. Anyways, I'm very well traveled, which is a good thing, which isn't a good thing because that means I've left a great big huge carbon footprint. But the good news is that we have a Tesla Model 3, so we're kind of making up for it. But I've seen firsthand what climate change can look like. I have seen the glaciers in Alaska, how much they melted in 10 years, and I've also seen desertification in Central America, and I saw the remnants of Hurricane Katrina. Now back then, that was great big huge news. Now we get like 3 per year of those great big huge hurricanes, and we get tornadoes in places we never had them before. Anyways, we didn't listen to our First Nations when they were warning us back in the 60s and 70s. That was Chief Dan George, who was always talking about the land and how we had to be stewards of the land. And we didn't listen to the scientists in '88 because we were too busy with our own lives. Anyways, we figured we had lots of time. And sadly, still people are not listening. They're turning a blind eye or giving us Band-Aid solutions. Like, for example, Trudeau, he promised to plant 2 billion trees. It's going to take at least 1 trillion trees. But the good news is that because of us, the Green Party, and because of you, the other parties are now adopting our platform that has been in place since 2008. But unfortunately, they all fall just a little bit short. Sorry, Peter, but even the NDP, I love you dearly, but I have really enjoyed getting to know this man over this election. The plan will miss the net zero 2050 target by 40 million tons of greenhouse gases. Okay, anyways, next.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. My name is Hanson Jin. I'm the candidate for the People's Party of Canada. Just a little bit about me. I'm born and raised in Calgary. I moved out to Byrne actually in 2017. I'm just down the street, literally. So how I've gotten into politics really is a bit of a strange story, but at the same time, I think it's really commonplace. Most people I've come across just don't seem to care about politics. Like, it's just too much info. It's way above high level. It's very complex stuff. But 2015 was very pivotal in terms of me wanting to understand what is happening in this world. Why is things shifting? It doesn't make sense. So I actually took the time to start researching, and I actually went and looked for a party that actually represented my values, which actually turned out to be the People's Party that launched last year with Maxime Byrne. Okay, so the 4 pillars are individual responsibility, personal freedom, respect, and fairness. And I think that is a value for every Canadian that they can stand up for. I'm just going to keep this short and sweet. I really don't have a long diatribe. I am by no means polished in public speaking. I'm a rather private individual, and this is really new to me. So thank you for your time.
Perfect. I'm glad you guys didn't go down, because in these shoes I wouldn't make it back up. But my name is Megan. I'm the Conservative Party candidate for the upcoming federal election. So I think you guys are social studies classes, so you guys know that the federal government deals with decisions that are made that impact all Canadians. So there's a provincial government as well, and they deal with problems that are within the province. We also have municipalities. So in dealing with the federal government, I appreciate what my other candidates have said, because it's clear right now that there are problems. And the good news is that there are many different solutions. There isn't usually one answer or one course that we need to take. Change can come from a variety of different angles. And our responsibility up here today is to pitch our different platforms, so each different party's solution to a given problem. So when you look at Conservatives, one of the main things that has set us apart as a party is we have said that we want to put our faith and our confidence in people. So when you look at other governments that want to raise your taxes, that want to balloon the size of government, it is because they think they can spend your tax dollars better than you can. And Conservatives disagree with that. It's more of a grassroots approach. It's putting trust back in you and saying, you know what, you're a critical thinker, especially today. Each of you in this room, you're here because you are future critical thinkers. You're probably critical thinkers now, and you're engaging with the issues that matter to you. So our party is one that puts confidence in people, not in government, that's going to lower your taxes, because really there can be no freedom without economic freedom. And we've been saying from the start that a dollar in the hand of someone who earns it is better than the dollar of the hand, or a dollar in the hand of a government that taxes it. So, looking forward to debating the issues with my fellow candidates today.
Oh, thank you. You all were very concise. Thank you for doing that. Let's get on to some of the planned questions. These are questions that were researched by a couple of my Social Studies 11 classes using the Sustainable Development Goals as a framework for these. The first question is about climate change, which is, of course, something that's been on the forefront of many people's minds recently. So the question gives a preamble. Some of today's youth are being repeatedly shut down when expressing their ideas and plans to take action in regard to climate change. The majority feel like their voices aren't being heard enough. What are your party's views on this particular matter? Can we go right to left? Or left to right?
You decide.
I am in charge. How about if we start with the Green Party? That might be a good way to begin.
Okay. Excellent. Yes, the Green Party. I was a teacher for 20 years, as I said, and I think it's very, very important that young people be heard, because it's your country and your planet and your future. One of the things the Green Party would like to do is to lower the voting age to 16, because as far as I'm concerned, 16-year-olds are adults. And not only that, but they know so much more than we did at that age because of the internet. And as you know, the Green Party has the most comprehensive plan for climate change out of all the parties, and that we intend to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 60% by 2030. We intend to ban fracking and any fossil fuel project. We intend to take the $10 to $13 billion intended for the pipeline and to use that money to build solar farms, wind farms, geothermal energy from abandoned wells in Alberta, and to build the infrastructure that will provide us with tidal energy. And we'll also retrofit commercial, residential properties and institutions, and that will create over 4 million jobs. By the way, that's called Mission Possible. You've all got that brochure, and if you haven't got it, you can get it in the back. Another thing Greens are big on is helping you start your adult life debt-free. That's why we'll be making university tuition free. And that's why we'll fund corporations to create new jobs for you guys, for youth, because it's really hard to get that first job coming out of university. And we'll also help with affordable housing by building 400,000 units, or renovating will equal 400,000 units in the next 10 years.
So the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, 2B, states that everyone has the freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press and other media of communication. So effectively, if you're being shut down, your rights are being violated, right? So, and the real question is, why are they shutting you down? The whole idea of having open, respectful dialogue is so then we can actually refine ideas, right? If we have opposing views, let's find out why our views are opposing, and what are the good points that we can take from both and create a better plan for everyone, or a better idea that we can execute, right? So the People's Party actually has a policy on freedom of expression. We want to enforce that. The biggest thing is, unfortunately, people are ignoring, or they don't know that their rights are being violated. So we just need to enforce the laws that are currently on hand. So if the discussion is about climate change, have it. Don't let yourself be shut down. Thank you.
Gonna get comfortable with you guys. So I'm actually glad that Hanson went that way, because I think he brings up a really good point. And when looking at the question, it addressed youth being repeatedly shut down and expressing their ideas, and the majority feeling like their voices aren't heard. And I think your point was very valuable, in that your voices, each and every one of you, your voices matter. Again, in that this is social studies, who here has heard of Thomas D'Arcy McGee? Anyone? He's one of our fathers of Confederation. And just before Confederation, he had this speech, and I don't think it was the House, I'm not sure what they called it at the time, but it's called The Shield of Achilles, and it's beautiful. If you're into speech writing and stuff like that, look it up, because it's gorgeously delivered. But he had this line, this was in 1860, I think it was, and he says, "Difficulties indeed there are, but none, sir, in my humble judgment, what could not be overcome." And when you look at the challenges that we are facing today, it's that same mindset. They can be overcome, and the challenges that we are facing, be they affordability, be they climate change or whatever, each and every one of you, our challenges are not more difficult than the ones that our forefathers have faced. So dig in, get involved, make your voice heard, and volunteer.
So the question really was about engaging the youth, I believe, and enabling them to have their voices heard. And, I think it's really important that you understand what that actually is. You're in a country where free speech is encouraged, and it doesn't matter what your ideas are. It doesn't matter if people don't agree with you. It doesn't matter if what you're saying is not popular. If you look at whatever you studied in history class in the last 200-300 years, all sorts of ideas that were not popular eventually became popular. And it's incredibly important that the youth, starting very early on, start going out and talking about what they believe in, even if it's not popular. That's how we evolve as a society. Now, the Libertarian Party, which I stand for, we stand for liberty. It's really simple. Libertarian liberty. We stand for giving people complete freedom to express themselves and work in whatever job they want and live however they want. So we believe in the left and the right. Social freedoms, fiscal freedoms. And this is something that I believe is important, is having the best of the both worlds. As a youth, therefore, I would say that if you really, really want to get engaged, take politics seriously. The person running your country is actually very important, and people take this for granted. Get involved in government, volunteer for one of the parties, volunteer for my party. We're a smaller party, and we're always open and looking for people that have interesting thoughts and want to get involved. The last thing I want to say is, events, this is something that happened actually yesterday. We had an event yesterday, it was canceled. And the reason it was canceled was because the organizers and some other people in our community felt that the people running the event, they didn't like what they were standing for. And this is completely wrong. Democracy is not about judging what somebody believes in and telling them to keep quiet. It's about encouraging people to speak openly about their ideas and letting others criticize them, condemn them, or support them. So, if there's any sort of opportunity to express yourself democratically, you have a responsibility to participate and encourage that. You don't judge the person for their views ahead of time. Thank you.
This generation will be the most profoundly impacted by climate change. And so making sure that you're involved. So many of you were involved in the climate strike, as I was, walking down 6th Street in New Westminster, leaving my old school, NWSS, that I graduated from, and marching with hundreds and hundreds of students. Suzanne was there too. And that type of activity and involvement is going to make a difference. I favor, and the NDP favors, lowering the voting age to 16 for that very reason. And you can get involved in campaigns now to make a difference. We also will eliminate tuition fees, starting by shifting all of the loans to grants. These are all fundamental changes that will make a difference for your generation. But above all, it's the political involvement. That is why the NDP has the youngest and most diverse team of candidates that has ever been presented in Canadian political history. How many of you have seen Jagmeet Singh in action? A number of you. And you'll see him next Monday night at the Leaders' Debates, the first person of color to head a major political party in North America running for the position of Prime Minister. Our diverse team of candidates is 50% women. It includes more youth that have ever run for office than ever before. About 25% of our overall candidate team are people of color. We have Indigenous people, people with disabilities, representatives of the LGBTQ community. When you look at the NDP team running for office, you can see the diversity of Canada reflected right there on the floor of the House of Commons if we win government on October 21st. And you are all aware of the diversity of Canada, because Byrne Creek is in the heart, the most diverse neighborhood in all of North America. So that is why getting youth involved is fundamental to shifting the way politics is done. There's been tens of billions of dollars given to lobbyists, given to the banking industry, the oil and gas industry, to overseas tax havens. It's time now that those resources are invested in you. The only way that's going to happen is if you get involved and get active for this federal election. Thanks.
Okay, our second question is about workplace safety. According to statistics from the Association of Workers' Compensation Board of Canada in 2017, there were 251,508 reported injuries, 31,441 of these claims being from young workers aged 15 to 24. However, these were only the claims that were accepted. This being said, how will your party help incite young workers to speak up for themselves and report more workplace injuries or accidents? Let's start with you, Peter. That's okay?
Yep, I was just shutting off my cell phone.
I remember as a young worker, as I started off after high school, after graduating in WSS, I worked as a laborer, worked in the oil refinery, Byrne oil refinery, worked in a number of factories. A number of times I was in very dangerous situations. The antidote to the problems with workplace safety, particularly with young workers, is having organizations in the workplace. And that's why when you compare unionized to non-unionized workplaces, there's a vast difference. There's a 30% reduction in serious injury when it is a unionized workplace. There is an 83% reduction in serious in death in the workplace when it is a unionized workplace, which is why the NDP has always favored women and men getting together in the workplace and organizing themselves collectively, going and effectively organizing a labor union. That makes a difference to health and safety. We're also finding in BC, because of the new BC NDP government, that workplace safety violations are going down because of increased inspection in the workplaces, which makes a difference as well. Your health and safety should be absolutely a priority. And that means if you choose to go into the workplace after you graduate from Byrne Creek, rather than going on to college or university, you need to make sure that that place that you're working in is safe. If it's a unionized firm, the chances are much less that you might be hit by a workplace injury. That's why we favor making sure that people can get together and organize the workplace if they choose to do so. Thank you.
All right. So I work for Siemens Canada, and every year we get refreshers on safety. And it's kind of been drilled into my head. It is the worker's responsibility and the employer's responsibility to keep you informed about best and safe work practices. So the key thing here is don't put your safety on someone else. You are just as much responsible to take care of it yourself, to actually speak up and say, I don't feel so comfortable to do this, okay? Within the question, a key word that does kind of concern me is the word incite. Now, it can be taken to encourage, or the alternate side is to actually promote violence or unlawful actions, which we definitely don't want. All right? So, in the People's Party, we believe individual responsibility is key, right? Main thing to remember, no one's really going to take care of you but you. Near miss or an actual incident is an opportunity to learn what went wrong and how we can improve our procedures and how we can behave moving forward. All right, thank you.
Yeah, I made note of that word myself, but the student, that was the word the student wanted, but yes, I suspect it's a little more encouragement.
Okay, so when I read this question yesterday, I was a bit confused because there was some information that was missing. It wasn't saying how many claims were rejected. So I actually went and I called up workman's compensation, and this is what they told me. Was it the employer who wouldn't place the claim, or was it the employee who was too afraid to make the claim for fear of losing work? Bosses are not allowed to withhold information when a young person is injured. That's what workman's compensation is there for, to protect the employee. Was there a doctor's diagnosis involved? Was it a case of the doctor not believing you? Now, the other possibility is perhaps, as is often the case, that youth is simply ignored. Oh, okay, good. That's when you need an adult to get on board with you. They have a louder voice and won't quit. And I'm saying that as a teacher and as a mom. I have gone after people on behalf of my kids when they are not being listened to, and I will go and talk to whoever I need to so that they will be listened to. But if they're in the wrong, I will also say, oh, I'm so sorry. But yes, get someone to help you. If nobody's listening to you, your voice must be heard.
So this is an important question. And again, with the school angle, Canada is a federation. So when we look at the federal government, again, they are responsible for decisions that impact all Canadians. So when we look specifically at the Workers' Compensation Board, that is the jurisdiction of the provinces, which means that our provincial MLA here is Judy Darcy. And on that one, that means that she's the one to call when you say, hey, on Workers' Compensation Boards, this is really important to me, I want to discuss this with you. Now, when it comes to the different levels of government, why is that important? This is the way our system's set up, and it is important that each different level of government respects the jurisdiction of other decisions. When the federal government starts making decisions for the provinces, or when the provinces start trying to make decisions that belong to the federal government, it results in a breakdown of our system. So I'm going to refer you to Judy Darcy on this one. I had her contact information, but you guys are, is it Gen Z? You guys know how Google works very well. But I would emphasize that in Canada we have different levels of government, and this is provincial.
So, as the youth right now, one day you're going to be able to vote, and, you're going to have a huge amount of responsibilities, sorry to tell you that are going to land on your shoulders, and one of them is yourself. I think it's really important to understand that while we have things like unions around and we have the government there to try to take care of you and protect you from workplace danger and sometimes even the negligence of your own employer, the number one person responsible for you is yourself. And that's not going to change. No matter where in the world you go, ultimately you have to watch out for yourself. And this is something that I as a libertarian really want to share with you, is that you need to understand that the government is not necessarily out there to protect you. They want to give you the illusion that they are, but that's not the reality. The reality is they want to stay in government, they want to have power, and they want to keep friends with the large companies that they're actually getting all their incentives from. And their incentives are not necessarily to take care of you, it's the illusion of that. So it's really important to understand that while these unions are around, while your employer might seem to be altruistic, it's really vital for you to be vigilant about your own safety, to be aware of the programs, to vote for a government that actually empowers you to be in charge, and for you to also be able to take your employer to task. If you're working at a company that doesn't believe in workplace safety, if they're taking their employees for granted, you don't count on the union, you don't count on the government to step in, you step in. My party, we believe in enabling people to take their employers, any kind of company, even if it's a company polluting your environment, take them to court, sue them. We have an excellent court system where you can take someone and you can challenge them on whatever it is they're failing to do as a company. Companies have responsibilities, you have a responsibility. So my party is really here to enable you to have that freedom so that you can protect yourself, have that responsibility, but also feel that pride that you are in charge of your life. You're not depending on someone else to take care of you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay, our third question is regarding Indigenous women. As we all know, Indigenous women from First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities face violence, marginalization, exclusion, and poverty due to their status. What will you do to ensure the number of hate crimes against them will decrease? Would you like to go? I think we're going to
So, I actually grew up in northern Canada. I grew up in northern Quebec and in the Yukon. So, as a matter of fact, a good 25% of my friends happen to be First Nations people, and I had fantastic relationships with them. I also heard about some of the terrible stories that they ran into. In Manitoba, for example, there's a stigma about people that are First Nations, and it's actually quite unfortunate. All of the stuff that we hear about in pop culture, the stuff that we hear about in the news is cherry-picked, to be honest. I mean, the news doesn't report the good stuff. They always report the bad, and we get a false impression of people. And, that's what's going on here. In terms of what's going on with the First Nations, I mean, one of the things that the Libertarian Party, and I myself personally have absolute conviction about, is the injustice that has occurred against the First Nations people. As I said, I've had the opportunity to grow up with these people, and I feel that a lot has been wronged against them. Treaties were signed in the last 3-4 centuries that are not being upheld. They're taken for granted, they're marginalized. I lived in the United States. Don't get me started about how they're treated down there. It's even worse than it is up here. So for me, if my government were to come into Ottawa and take power, one of the first things we would do is we would level the playing field. And this is not to harm other Canadians. I understand. I'm a native-born Canadian myself. But these people have to be enabled to have right to our justice system, and they have to have the right to protect themselves. And any of the wrongs that have happened in the past have to be made right. So my goal here really is to go in there and ensure that this fantastic, wonderful culture, the First Nations people are an amazing culture. They've been around on this continent for multiple thousands of years to protect it, to ensure the language is protected, to ensure their people are protected, and to ensure all these crimes that are happening against them see justice. Thank you.
I think as a young woman myself, when you hear stories, I find it breaks my heart, and I imagine that it breaks many of your hearts as well. Which is why I think it was really disappointing when we saw the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and we saw the Liberals play politics with it. We saw them request an extension of their mandate so they could continue to listen to people's stories. And the Liberal government turned them down because they wanted the report to come in before the election. And I think it's heartbreaking when you see politics put before people and before reconciliation, which is part of what this question is about. I think it comes down to reconciliation. And Conservatives genuinely believe that all Canadians should have access to the same rights, the same services, and the same opportunities, regardless of their ethnic background, or regardless of their age, their gender, their socioeconomic status, their religion, whatever other marker we want to put on it. We are Canadians, and we are equal before and under the law. But when it comes to violence against women specifically, I think there is a role that the government has, but also it comes down to each and every one of us. It comes down to each and every one of us looking out in our communities and looking out for our neighbors. And whether it's prejudice, whether it's violence, whatever it may be, when you see it, call it out. Stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. The government has a role in this, but it's each and every one of you in this room who plays a part as well.
First Nations is a real passion of mine. My first question, oh, I'm on the wrong one. The most important thing the Green Party wants to do is to phase out the Indian Act. It's totally racist and totally sexist. I grew up in Chilliwack, and I went to school with a whole bunch of First Nation kids. And back in the 60s and 70s, we had segregations. The brown kids played together, the white kids played together. It wasn't official, but that's what happened. And there are a few people who are able to rise above them, and one of them ended up becoming the Grand Chief over all of British Columbia. His name's Doug Kelly. You see him all the time on the news, and I'm so proud of him. I'm so proud of who he's become. And I'm also really proud of what's happening with the First Nations that I haven't seen for a while. A lot of them have university degrees now, and a lot of First Nations are becoming doctors, lawyers, teachers. They're also developing their own land. How many people here have been to Tawasin Mills, that wonderful shopping mall? Isn't it gorgeous? It's just gorgeous. That was done by First Nations. I think it's cool. As for the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls go, Green Party intends to follow all the recommendations, and we also tend to follow all the recommendations of UNDRIP, and that's the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Indigenous lives matter just as much as anyone else's. And my question is, why has so little been done about the murdered and missing women and girls? As far as hate crimes go, I feel that free university tuition, giving these women the education they need, will give them the confidence to start their own businesses and to accomplish what they want in life and to stand up to racism. And by the way, girls, how many girls here have taken a course in self-defense? Please do, because you're going to need it. I've used it twice. My brothers taught me. My sisters use it a couple of times too. Please do take a course in self-defense. And lastly, the Green Party intends to make sure that all small towns have proper transit in northern BC and all of Canada so that these women can travel in safety, because many of them were killed on the Highway of Tears. Thank you.
Does anybody know what this square of moose hide on my lapel represents? The Moose Hide campaign is to commemorate missing and murdered Indigenous women. So I wear the moose hide every day of the year, except for the 2 weeks around Remembrance Day when I wear the poppy to remember our fallen soldiers. The Moose Hide campaign commemorates the over 1,000 Indigenous women in Canada that are either missing or have been murdered. And so nothing is more fundamental to the security of citizens right across the country than actually investing and making sure that in Indigenous communities there is no longer the marginalization that has led to the vulnerability that has led to 1,000 of our sisters being killed. That means no longer having boiled water advisories on reserves. Unbelievably, there are hundreds of Indigenous communities where they can't even drink the water. The school, Attawapiskat School, some of you may have heard of it, in Northern Ontario, just one of many Indigenous schools. Nothing like this, nothing like Byrne Creek. In Attawapiskat, there is a toxic ingredients in the school itself that are making the students sick. There is no heating, and the federal government under Mr. Trudeau has refused to do anything about it. These are the kinds of changes that need to take place. An NDP MP, Romeo Saganash, an Indigenous MP from Northern Quebec, presented in Parliament a bill that would bring about national reconciliation. It means putting into place the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. It passed through the House of Commons, and then Conservative and Liberal senators killed it in the Senate. The NDP is elected as government. We're going to move right back onto putting through that important legislation and start the work of investing in Indigenous communities. So there is no longer any marginalization, no longer the vulnerability that takes place, and we will no longer have to mourn the missing and murdered Indigenous women. We have to work together to resolve this crisis.
All right. So to really tackle any type of hate crime, poverty, that type of thing, first and foremost, I believe it's all about educating people. We need to bring it out into the open. We need to have open dialogue about it. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? We can't, obviously it's continuously happening because not enough people are aware about it to do something or speak up about it, right? So something as simple as most Indigenous communities not even having enough or having actual connectivity to the rest of the world. They don't have proper phone coverage, they don't have actual internet connection. Like, how do they communicate? They're isolated, right? So how does this information get out if we don't actually go there and physically see for ourselves? I talked to our candidate in Skeena Bulkley Valley quite often. He has a large area. He drives a lot, going from place to place, campaigning, and he actually hits tons of dead zones. Something as simple as not even having cell phone coverage. These are prime opportunities. It's like going down a dark alleyway and someone can just jump out and attack you. And it's like something as simple as implementing better cell phone coverage for these communities, so then if something were to happen, they can send a distress call. They can call 911, ask for help, right? So the People's Party did just recently release our Aboriginal policy. One of the biggest thing is we do want to repeal the Indian Act, right? In all fairness, it should have been done a long time ago. But we want to bring equity, we want to bring respect to everybody as Canadians. They're Canadians as well. Like, why are they being treated second class, right? So please do check it out online. I don't know it inside out, unfortunately, I will admit. But it's there. We've released something official on it that we intend to act on. Thank you.
That's everybody.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, our next question has to do with something that's actually a provincial responsibility, setting minimum wage. But we'd like to know, does your party think it's a good idea to raise minimum wage to help people make more money for their families? Let's start with Megan.
Perfect. So as just noted, this is a jurisdiction of the provinces, and I really do believe firmly in respecting decisions by the provinces. But really what this question is getting to is a question of affordability. We are looking at a rising cost of living. I know as a 25-year-old, many of my friends are looking to purchase their first home, or they're looking to start their families, and there's very real questions of how they're going to afford it. For many of you guys, maybe you're wondering how you're going to pay for your first year of university. And we look at it right now, I think it's close to 50% of Canadians are within $200 of financial insolvency each month, which means they're within $200 of not making ends meet. And there's a couple different things that we want to do as Conservatives. The first thing is lower your personal taxes. That's leaving more money in your pocket so you can build the life you want, instead of having money spent or going to government coffers. I think when you look at especially the stories that have come out over the last 4 years of wasteful spending by the Liberals. When you look at Justin Trudeau spending $17,000 to fly a private chef to India. There's example after example after example of government using money in ways that your families wouldn't. And so I think the answer is to reduce your taxes, to leave more money with you. That puts the freedom back in your hands, and it makes it easier to cover the basics. So much of this is leaving more money in your pocket so you can build the life you want, so you can afford the basics. And again, putting trust in people rather than government. And again, with the quote, a dollar in the hand of someone who earned it is better than a dollar in the hand of a government who taxed it.
The Green Party plans to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. But better yet, what we're going to create is a guaranteed livable income for people. And what a guaranteed livable income is it's a certain amount of money that you're going to receive from the government, well, adults and taxpayers anyways. And the idea is that if you lose a job, you won't be in trouble. You'll be able to survive anyways. You'll be able to pay your rent, you'll be able to feed your family, whatever. Now it's going to vary from city to city. Like for example, Vancouver, you'll get a much larger sum of money than you would say up in the Yukon. Because of course it's probably going to be cheaper to live up in the Yukon than it is in Vancouver. Anyways, this will help Canadians create their own businesses and to do what they'd like to do. So if you, like for example, I'll give you a good example. When I was a young woman, I had a master's degree in music composition, And I was trying to make my living composing music and playing the piano in restaurants, and I could not do it. And once I had to go to the bank with my mom as a co-signer to get a loan so I could pay my rent. Now, had I had a guaranteed livable income, I would probably still be a composer and pianist, but I'm not.
So Canadian families are struggling. Canadian families actually have a record debt load, worse than any other industrialized country. You know how your families are struggling to pay for basics, to pay for housing, to pay for medication, to think about your education in college and university, to think about childcare. All of those things are enormous pressures. And they've been put into place by successive governments, both conservatives and liberals, who try to put together this false deal that if we take $50 off your taxes, that somehow you're benefiting from that. The reality is, the people that are benefiting from what is a profoundly unfair tax system are the very, very wealthy Canadians and very profitable corporations. The Parliamentary Budgetary Officer says $40 billion go offshore in electronic transfers. Those are funds that should be here as part of our collective well-being, to pay for the things that we have just talked about: affordable housing, having in place pharmacare, having in place tuition-free education, ensuring that there's childcare, ensuring that all those things, those basics, are taken care of. Now, the reality is, when we talk about the hourly wage, there are hundreds of thousands of workers that are governed by the federal labor code. So yes, there's a provincial component, but there are hundreds of thousands of workers that can get up to $15 an hour if we raise the minimum wage at the federal level. That's what the NDP favors, because those working poor are people that need to get those supports. But it doesn't end there. It's all of these other programs actually can make a difference as well. Talk about John, who's a security guard, lives in this area. He earns less than $15 an hour, and what he is struggling with is, because he needs his car for work, either repairing his car or fixing his teeth, because there's no access to dental care. And he can only do one of those two things. So he lives with the pain because he doesn't have a choice. That's why the NDP is also bringing in dental care for all families earning less than $90,000.
We all recognize that cost of living is high, right? So I believe on average, a Canadian owes about $1.70 for every dollar earned. Let that sink in for a second here. $1.70 why we're constantly living in debt. No wonder why we're constantly borrowing to survive, right? The issue with that is we're stealing from our future in doing so, right? So we don't believe in raising the minimum wage to $15. There's a reason behind that. Minimum wage positions are there to help you build a foundation to get skills. They're not intended to be long-term positions, right? So, and we've seen how this has played out. If you actually go look at Alberta, they raised the minimum wage to $15, and what had actually happened afterwards? We had small businesses shut down because they couldn't afford the increase to pay their staff, or they had to cut staff. So people actually received, either lost their job or actually lost hours, so they were earning less. And then that's why all of a sudden we see this huge increase of automation. Why do we go to McDonald's or many of these fast food places? They're automating with tablets so we can purchase for ourselves, so they don't have to pay somebody. So is it really helping anyone in doing so? Biggest thing is, the People's Party intends to balance the budget in 2 years so we don't rob from your future. And then we want to reform the tax system, right? So then we have more money in your pocket. We want to create a two-tier flat tax, 0% for anyone earning under $15,000 a year, 15% flat tax from $15,000 to $100,000 earned a year, and then anything over $100,000 is a flat 25% flat tax. Simple to easy and easy to understand. There's no confusion behind it like it is today. Thank you.
So most of you probably have an iPhone or an Android. How much does an iPhone cost? About $1,000, let's just say. $2,000? Wow. Okay. Now, I'm going to give you an example. It's not really good to compare an iPhone to a person working for minimum wage, but I'm going to do it anyways. If I came and told you that the government passed a law that says you have to sell your iPhone for no less than $4,000, how many people are going to come and buy it? Are you going to be able to sell your iPhone? No. You know what's going to end up happening? 2 years from now, when the iPhone 12 comes out, there's going to be a stack of iPhone 11s and 10s and 9s sitting around, and nobody's going to be able to get rid of them, and they're going to be idle. That's unemployment. When the government comes in and creates a minimum wage, there's an illusion. There's an illusion that you're giving everyone a certain minimum amount of money, and now they're going to be able to go pay their rent, get their education, and everyone's going to be happy. It doesn't work. As soon as you start increasing the minimum wage, you're simply increasing unemployment, because what you've actually done is you've made it illegal for companies to hire people that are below a certain economic value. And I apologize for using that term, but if somebody is working at McDonald's, they're not going to make as much as someone working as a doctor or a teacher or a dentist. And if you suddenly tell McDonald's that McDonald's, it's illegal for you to pay anyone less than $15 an hour for that labor, you basically prohibited them from hiring someone that is fit for that job. And what they're going to do is they're just going to either find a way to automate, as my PPC colleague mentioned, or they're going to shut down. Recent news, you can look it up on Google, New York City, I live in the United States, New York City passed a law recently to increase their minimum wage. You would think that suddenly everyone's going to be happy and all these minimum wage workers are going to have prosperity. Didn't happen. You know what actually happened? Layoffs, and the restaurants started shutting down. There are restaurants that have been around for 30 years in New York that are shutting down. Fantastic restaurants. Minimum wage doesn't work. Please look at economics soundly and understand that if you really want to encourage people to have money, help them, cut taxes. You know, educate yourself, get a job, and work towards your future. That's the way to increase your wages. Thank you.
Okay, our next question is another environmentally focused question. Since a significant portion of plastic waste reaches the ocean, how would you promote plastic waste management and improve waste collection infrastructure across Canada?
All right. We all want to do the right thing for the planet. Plain and simple, right? We all love nature. We all love, like, if you guys travel, it's beautiful. Why would anyone want to destroy it? But we have to learn from our mistakes, right? So, first and foremost, plastics need to be recycled here locally. I can't remember how long ago, it must have been a couple of years now, that China stopped accepting plastics from us. Did you know we were shipping our plastics, recyclables, to China for processing? Does that make sense? No. So first and foremost, it needs to be recycled here. And the second problem is not all plastics can be recycled, right? Unfortunately, that's just the reality of it. But the private sector is actually developing technologies that actually can actually reform them and reprocess them, I guess you could call it, into usable diesel. So it's giving it a second life for these non-recyclable plastics. Private sector can do the best thing. It's like, we don't want to intervene on something that may not be our jurisdiction, so we do want to respect municipal and provincial jurisdictions, like how they would choose to collect and all that stuff. But realistically, we believe the private sector is the best suited to address the plastic pollution that is plaguing us in reality. All right, thank you.
Green Party plan is that if we make it, we have to deal with it. We're not sending it overseas anymore. We're going to start a national plastic waste strategy. How many people here have seen all the dead birds and dead whales with all their stomachs full of plastic on social media, right? How many people have seen pictures of the garbage patch? And also islands that are filled with garbage that nobody lives on? I've seen it too. So what we're going to do is we're going to ban all single-use plastics. That's plastic bags, it's quite a list here. Plastic bags, small plastic water bottles, balloons, straws, plates, cups, lids, cutlery, cotton buds, drink stirrers, cigarette filters, packing straps, multi-packaging rings, takeaway packaging, and anything else that's not recyclable. And then we're going to set for 2022, a reusable and refillable packing targets for supermarkets. So that means that if you used up your bottle of shampoo, you'll be able to take that bottle back to the supermarket and refill it and not get another plastic bottle. Isn't that a great idea? I mean, there are already stores that do that, but there's one in Port Moody, and there's one on Main Street in Vancouver as well. Another problem we face is that a lot of our clothes is made of polyester. And when it's washed, all kinds of microfibers go down the drain. They get into, fish eat them, they get into our water, we eat them. And so the Green Party will require that all new washing machines have to have filters that are removable so that the fiber can be cleaned out. And the last thing, by 2021, we want to have a proper solid waste management system in Indigenous and Arctic communities. And finally, no more microbeads in cleaning products. Thank you.
Thank you. So, all of us watch TV. We know what a space shuttle is. We know what it is to be on a space station, like the International Space Station. Let me ask you something. If there was 10 people on the International Space Station, you were one of them, and the 9 other people on there were smoking cigarettes, would it make any difference what you would do? No, it doesn't matter. Now, I constantly hear from every other party member, every other candidate, that, oh, you know what, Canada, this is what we got to do. We got to stop using plastics. We got to really, tighten everything down, and that's just going to make the world better. I'm sorry. Let's look at this realistically. Earth is a spaceship. We're hurtling through space, and there's 8 billion plus people on this planet. And I'm going to give you some statistics. Less than 10% of the pollution coming in the ocean is coming from us. That's a fact. I'm not telling you we can't improve it, but we're contributing. We're that one guy on that space station that's not smoking. And we're telling ourselves, well, gee, I'm just not going to smoke and everything's going to be better. Come on, it's not realistic. You really want to fix the problem? Focus on where the problem is. The problem is coming from other countries, and I'm sorry, it's coming from Asia. I actually traveled the world in the last 2 years. I lived in Singapore, I went to Thailand, I went to Vietnam, I went to South Korea, and I can tell you, the level of scrutiny that we have in Canada with respect to how we deal with plastics and all that is not matched. The pollution, the garbage patch that we see in the ocean, it's not coming from us. A recent article came out in the news that a lot of that plastic's coming from Asia. They know that because they can look at the bottles. They can see where everything's coming from. It's not coming from us. It's coming from Asia. It's coming from merchant ships that are dumping garbage into the ocean. And meanwhile, here we are deluding ourselves thinking we can fix the problem. You want to fix the problem? Get involved in government. Lobby the government to get these other countries to shut down the dumping of plastics into the ocean. That's going to fix the problem. That's the solution to the problem. Thank you.
How many pounds of plastics do you think is going into the ocean every hour on this planet? Anyone have a guess? 1.5 million pounds every hour of every day, of every week, of every month. They're going into our oceans internationally. So I simply disagree with anybody who pretends that Canada is not part of the problem. You may have seen as well the so-called recyclables that we sent to the Philippines, which were just garbage, being dumped by Canada on the third world. So Canada has a fundamental responsibility. That's why I'm pleased to say it was Gord Johns, an NDP MP, who brought forward the motion in the House of Commons to ban single-use plastics in Canada. And it passed just a few months ago in the House of Commons. So now the government is forced to take action and to ban single-use plastics, which will happen in the next couple of years. The only political leader that does not use single-use plastics is Jagmeet Singh. Jagmeet's renowned for this. He goes from place to place. He has an extraordinarily tough schedule, but he refuses to use plastic bottles. He refuses to use plastics of any type. What he does is he drinks from glasses like we have here. That's the kind of responsibility, I think, and leadership that we need to actively crack down on what is a growing crisis in our oceans. If we want to have healthy wild salmon, if we want to have the kind of planet that you deserve to inherit from our generation, we need to take action, and we need to ban single-use plastics in Canada and take action internationally to do the same thing around the world.
So you guys can probably guess what I'm going to say next. This is, again, an area where the federal government will work with the provinces and the municipalities to harmonize recycling standards across the provinces so that we are taking care of things responsibly. We also want to work with industry to cut down on excessive packaging. It's a real problem. We've also said that as Conservatives, we want to end the practice of wastewater dumping. It's raw sewage that's going straight into many of our waterways, and we want to work with the provinces and municipalities to end that practice. So I hope if there's one thing that you take away from me from today, is that there's two prongs to every problem that we face, and there's an element of government regulation and legislation that needs to be in place and responsibility, but there is also personal responsibility. And the truth is that each and every time you go to the grocery store, each and every time you pack your lunch, you have a decision whether you're going to use a plastic bag or a reusable container. So I would say that we are on board with taking action to exactly like that, work with different levels of government to address this problem. But I would encourage you also to take responsibility and in your day-to-day lives, make choices that work towards this goal as well.
Thank you. Now it's out to you guys. We have a mic in the audience, and it is working. And please take the time to think about something that's important to you that maybe you'd like to ask any of these candidates a particular question of. All you have to do is put up your hand, and we'll have the mic in yours in a moment. Take your time.
Not everyone at once.
It always takes a little bit of time.
It's a lot to take in.
There's a hand in the back.
Hi. In terms of climate change action, the UN has stated that they're in post-supportive countries turning towards their indigenous and natives to lead this action. How are your parties working with the indigenous communities in fulfilling your climate change action plans?
Is that good?
Sure. That's a great question. And it goes right back to the question we answered earlier about the appalling situation, the appalling disrespect for Indigenous peoples right across the country. We need to put in place a climate change plan that actively engages Indigenous communities. Some of you have a copy of my Green New Deal, which is the only comprehensive legislation before the House of Commons. Some of you have it. If you don't, you can pick it up at the table as you leave, which specifically refers to ensuring that the full participation of Indigenous peoples in pushing back against the climate emergency. We have to reduce our emissions 50% by 2030. That can only occur if we're working actively and on an ongoing basis with Indigenous communities right across Canada. And so the Green New Deal, I see some of you have that pamphlet, is really the aspirational language for what we need to put into place so that we attain our climate objectives, fight back against the climate emergency, and involve Indigenous communities right across the country in full, meaningful, and lasting national reconciliation. Thank you for the question. It's a very good one.
What the Green Party would like to do is to have a government where it's not just the government, the federal government that's controlling everyone else. We are working in conjunction with the provincial government. We're planning on letting them develop a lot of our clean energy. Like, for example, we can have I don't know quite what you call them, they're sort of like small dams, with a creek. It's kind of like the old water wheel, only a little bit more elaborate. So they'll be in charge of a lot of those things. They'll be in charge also of solar farms and that sort of thing. And I guess that's about all I have to say.
So I have some news for you. There is no climate emergency. The news keeps talking about it because it's something you can talk about in the news, and the fact of the matter is the world is heating up. That's a reality. But let's just be clear about something. Just because the world is heating up doesn't mean we're causing it. There's a big difference between something we're observing and what's causing it. The world has been heating up. It's been heating up for a while. But if you actually look at the real science, not the science that the so-called climate scientists are putting out, if you actually look at the real science, you'll notice that they actually cherry pick where their timelines are. And this is really all a matter of time. If you take statistics over the last 3,000 years or longer, and we've got those statistics, and if you actually go back in time, you'll actually notice many periods in the past where the Earth's temperature went up far beyond what it is now. In fact, between the 30s and 40s, as you can look at this up, the temperature on this planet was actually higher. And if you actually look at the CO2 levels, they were not. There's no correlation between this whole climate emergency of CO2 and temperature. So again, critical thinking, folks. Look online. Please educate yourself and understand, is this really an emergency, or do you have other problems that are more important to solve? Thank you.
So we've been clear that we want to reinstate constructive consultations with stakeholders and Indigenous communities. We want to involve them in that process. We want to reinstate funding for wetland, watershed, and fisheries conservation that was cut by the Liberals. And we want to reconvene the hunting and angling advisory panel that the Liberals disbanded, so that those with the greatest interest in protecting species and habitats can share their expertise on how that's done.
All right, let me ask a question. How many of us actually make really good decisions when we're panicking? The reality is not many of us, if any, at all, right? And that's the People's Party's position is like, we agree that the climate is changing. We don't necessarily agree that it is primarily man-made. And the whole alarmism and the panic that is being stirred up isn't benefiting anybody. We can't have a sound conversation and dialogue to find out what's the root cause, what does our part play, and how can we work together to address the problem with everybody. So really that's just why I want to throw my 2 cents in, and I have to agree with Niraj. It's not really a climate emergency. The alarmism is just throwing things way out of whack. We need to have a level, calm mind so we can talk about this and actually come to terms with where the science is and how we can work together to find an actual solution.
Next question.
As a disabled person, and I struggle with mental health too, I have to turn to charities. Well, my family does, to afford hearing aid batteries and glasses and other equipment that are important to me and my survival. And with mental health, it's a hard climb. And I wanted to ask you guys, how will you support disabled people and the mentally ill with their personal development and their ability to afford equipment that they need in school, in post-secondary, and in their adult life?
That was a really good question. So again, this is something where the federal government works with the provinces, but a lot of the funding comes from the federal government, and so Conservatives have committed in our health and social program guarantee that we are going to increase funding by 3% year over year, so that those programs and services that Canadians rely on remain in place and that you and your family can count on them. We also want to make sure, I think it was Pierre Poilievre in the last government that introduced the Opportunity for Canadians with Disabilities Act. And the intention of the legislation was to make sure that if Canadians who had disabilities went out and got a job, that they weren't losing more in clawbacks through taxation than they were making in wages. And so I think there's two prongs to that answer. It's making sure that we are funding the health and social programs that Canadians rely on, and it's also making sure that when Canadians want to work, that we aren't taking money or we aren't disincentivizing that process.
All right, so the challenge is healthcare is actually a provincial jurisdiction, right? Now that being said, is right now there are funding being provided from the federal government, and that's where the contention comes in. There's no accountability to how that money is being spent. So we suffer long wait times, we suffer from inefficient systems right now in healthcare across all provinces and territories. So our plan actually is to actually put the responsibility back on the provinces so the members of the community can actually hold them accountable to actually proper spending, right? So we want to actually take the GST that we earn, which is about 40 billion a year, and we want to give the credits to the provinces so then they can actually spend the money accordingly and actually implement true programs within healthcare to actually help people with mental illness and actually improve wait times and actually have equipment available for you to purchase, right? And the next step would be to actually, again, bring back in the tax reforms so then actually more money's in your pocket.
I think mental health is one of the biggest issues that we have today with young people. My son called me up from the university. He's going to the University of Toronto where he's studying computer science. And this is twice in 1 year that he's called me up to tell me that somebody jumped off the computer science building. Now I think that's really serious. And apparently there's about 1.5 years waiting list to go and see a counselor or a psychologist or whatever. So we need to invest a great deal more money and to find a lot more mental health workers. Now the other day I was at this meeting with the Women's Council in Westminster, and this woman was talking all about her frustrations about her son, and she could not get the proper help for him because of the way our system is set up. So we have to fix that. Now regarding how can you pay for all the things that you need, that's what the guaranteed livable income is about. You could have the guaranteed livable income, and then you could also would have much more money to buy these things that you need. I really care about disabled kids. I've taught a lot of them, and I know it's really tough, and totally on your side.
So let me ask everyone a question. If somebody was taking 100% of your salary, would that be slavery? Yes. Hands? Okay. So 100% of your salary being taken by someone by force is slavery, right? We all agree. Now, where's the line drawn when it's not slavery anymore? 90%? If you receive 10 cents on every dollar, is that not slavery? 50%, 40%? Our governments all over the world have gotten everyone, the youth, indoctrinated, including myself, with this whole belief that they can take 40, 50 cents of your dollar and keep it and do what they want with it without any checks, any balances. You know what we call that? We call it taxes. I call it theft. So I want to solve these problems that people are having with regards to not having enough money at a systemic, fundamental level where we remove taxes. And this is not going to happen overnight. If my government comes in, we're going to do this systematically so that basically your GST, you keep it. Your income tax, you keep it. You get to spend the money the way you want it. And again, we're freeing you. We're giving you the opportunity to keep your money. June 19th of this year, it's June 19th or 24th of this year, was the first day, it's called Tax Freedom Day. That was the first day that if you were working in this country, the money from that point onwards was tax-free. It's as if everything that you paid until that date was 100% taxed. Think about that. Half the year you're working for the government, you're paying them. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. It's a very serious one, and it deserves a serious response. Before I was elected to Parliament, I ran the Western Institute for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, so worked with deaf and hard of hearing British Columbians. Also worked in partnership with other organizations for the blind, paraplegics, and including mental health. And we set up the first disability employment program for all of British Columbia in our province's history. The reality is for people with disabilities is that half of the homeless in our country tonight will be people with disabilities. Half of the folks that have to line up at food banks to make ends meet are people with disabilities. The poorest of the poor in our country are people with disabilities. So we need an action plan to be put into place. I brought forward in Parliament the Canadians with Disabilities Act in order to address physical disabilities. And we need to make sure all of the issues we've been talking about, from housing affordability through to dental care, also has a very positive impact on people with disabilities. But we need to make sure that we are providing assistive devices, and we need federally to follow the practices of the provincial BC NDP government, which has established the first provincial ministry for mental health and addictions in Canada. In fact, it's the only one. It is starting to provide support for people with mental health issues. We need, at the federal level, a federal ministry of mental health and addictions so that we can provide the supports for people who are facing mental challenges. This takes a change on how Ottawa works, and that's why it's so important for all of you to get involved in this election campaign so we can have this country be the change that we want to see moving forward after October 21st. Thank you.
Now, if you could just give these are the people that you're going to be choosing one of in your student vote on the 15th and the 16th of this month. And we'll just have one last brief word, 30 seconds each to say one last thing to you guys before I set you free for D-Block. Hopefully your teachers won't be too mad at me. Here you go.
Perfect. Well, how many of you guys are in grade 12 this year? Oh, that's a lot of hands. Well, come graduation, I can guarantee that many of you will receive the book. It's Dr. Seuss' Ode to Places You'll Go. You're going to get it. But he has this other quote that I've always loved. It goes, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. So I hope what you take away from this discussion today is that there is a role for government, but there also is a role for you. And again, where our party differs from others is it's leaving more money in your pocket so you can build the life you want, so you can support the causes you want, you can champion the people you want, you can have the freedoms that you want. Oh, okay, but anyways, thanks for coming out today, guys. I'm proud of you.
All right, I just want to say another thank you for everyone actually allowing me to speak here. I appreciate it, Greg. This respectful dialogue amongst ourselves, because we're all trying to achieve the same thing, we just have different approaches, which is fantastic, right? How can we get the best of ideas and implement them together so that everyone benefits? I'm going to say, as the next generation of leaders, be open-minded. Think for yourself, question everything. It's okay to agree to disagree. And stay true to your values.
Science doesn't lie. We are in a climate crisis right now. We could use some volunteers. We are right across from the Royal Columbian Hospital in the Curie Center. If you'd like to come and do some volunteering for us, we can give you credits for your volunteering. Thank you.
So, as a scientist, I believe in identifying the problems and then finding real solutions based on science, not on conjecture. That's what my party believes in. I'm deeply, deeply happy to see that there's so many students here that are actually interested in politics, that you're not trying to just get out of class. And I would definitely encourage you to get involved. I've got my business cards on the table. You can talk to me, come to my website. I have an open door policy. And yeah, definitely vote for Libertarian and talk to your parents about us. Thank you.
So with the housing crisis, with the climate crisis, we need your involvement. My office is just up at Edmonds, 1 block east of Kingsway. Yes, you get volunteer credits, but more importantly, you get involved and galvanized in a political campaign to set our country on a better path. So I hope to see you in the coming weeks. Your involvement will be key to making a difference and changing things in Ottawa. Thanks very much for coming out today. You've been amazing.
Give them a really big set of applause here, guys. Byrne Creek welcomes and thanks the candidates.